always forget to do that. Good afternoon. It is 4:13, and I'm going to go ahead and call the State Allocation Board meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person at the State Building and Construction Trades Council of California at 1231 I Street in Suite 303, Sacramento, California 95814, for anyone that would like to provide public comment in person. This meeting is also being conducted by way of Zoom meeting for members of the public that would like to participate remotely. In order for this meeting to run efficiently for those participating remotely, please note the following guidelines. All attendees will be muted during the meeting. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom meeting interface. I will call your name at the appropriate time, and OPSC staff will request to unmute you. Number two, if you are calling into the meeting and not using a computer or the Zoom application on a mobile device, you unfortunately will be unable to provide public comment at this time. The board will be meeting in closed session upon the conclusion of the general meeting pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E for the purpose of conferring with and receiving advice from legal counsel regarding 1, potential litigation, and 2, the case California School Finance Authority versus Today's Fresh Start, Los Angeles County Superior Court, Case 23 STC P03750, and the case California School Finance Authority versus LAUSD in Los Angeles Superior Court, case number 23 STC P03720. Before we start with our agenda items, we would like to take a few minutes to thank one of our former board members, Senator Newman, and I don't know. Is Senator Newman on? Okay. Oh, excellent. Thank you. It's hard to see from here. So I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge Senator Newman, and we will be presenting him with a resolution in acknowledgement of his dedication and service as a member of the State Allocation Board. Senator Newman recently just left the legislature. Senator Newman was appointed to serve as a member of the State Allocation Board on April 12, 2023. His first meeting was on April 26, 2023, and his last meeting was October 23, 2024. During his tenure on the State Allocation Board, he assisted the board in making apportionments and unfunded approvals for over $2.62 billion, representing over 687 projects for the school facility program and other programs administered by the board. Senator Newman also assisted the board in making apportionments in the amount of $375.4 million, representing 61 projects for the California Preschool, Transitional Kindergarten, and Full-Day Kindergarten Facilities Grant Program. Senator Newman helped shape policy that led to decisions enabling the State Allocation Board to address the many complex and sensitive issues that affect all school districts participating in State Allocation Board administered programs, including but not limited to the funding of projects for public schools on military installations, as well as maintaining the integrity of the school facility program by ensuring taxpayers of the state of California that bond funds as well as general fund proceeds for State Allocation Board administered programs were apportioned in an efficient, effective, and equitable manner. We thank Senator Newman for his commitment, dedication, and service to this board, as well as to the citizens of the state of California. Senator Newman's support to the State Allocation Board has elevated the success of the Office of Public School Construction's core purpose, which is to enrich the lives of California school children as stewards of the taxpayers' commitment to education. Senator Newman, we look forward to presenting you with a formal resolution in the near future, and again, thank you for your service. Are there any folks that would like to take a moment to make any additional comments? Well, we have the senator online. Assemblymember Martucci, excuse me. Yes,
I would like to thank Senator Newman for all of his service, not only on the State Allocation Board, but as my counterpart as the chair of the Senate Education Committee. He did a lot of great work, and really appreciate all that he's done for the people of the state of California.
Great. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just would like to thank Senator Newman for his service in the State Senate all these years, a true friend of working people, and germane to this board, a true friend to students and administrators and everybody involved in the K-12 school system in California as well. His service will be missed. And I'd just like to thank him on behalf of the building trades and myself for being a true friend and partner.
Any other comments? Yes, Assemblymember Davies.
Thank you. Again, I also want to say thank you so much, Senator It's been a pleasure working with you, and your insight and your experience that you've brought to this committee has been incredible. So thank you again and wish you the best.
Okay. All right. And you guys will have to help me because I can only see us on the screen, so if there are comments, I won't be able to see them online. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Well, thank you again, Senator Newman, and we will get you that resolution in person in short order. So thank you again for your service, and we wish you best luck.
And thank you for the kind words.
you.
And good luck to everybody. I appreciate your work.
Thank you, Senator Newman. I appreciate the thanks. Was there any other comments you'd like to make before we move on?
Yeah, again, thank you for the very thoughtful, very gracious gesture. Very proud to have had the privilege of serving with all of you on the State Allocations Board. I'm equally proud to have served as a principal co-author for with Assemblymember Marisucci to the Ed Bond, which just passed. And very excited to see how the $8.5 billion will be spent. They're desperately needed for investments in schools all over California. So, grateful to all of you for your service, especially grateful to the leadership and staff of the board. Thank you for all of your good work. Keep it up. I look forward to working with you in various ways.
Thank you so much. Well deserved. Appreciate that. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and Ms. Jones, if you would please call the roll, noting any members joining us from a remote location, please.
I certainly will. Senator Laird, Assemblymember Marisucci, here. Assemblymember Davies, here. Assemblymember Alvarez, Juan Morales.
What's that?
And
So how do you reckon?
sorry? Juan is meeting with us remotely today. Thank you. Jeremy Smith.
Here.
Ana Lasso.
Here.
Michelle Perrault.
Here.
And we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you so very much. With that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next order of business, which is to approve the minutes. Are there any, sorry, Ms. Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minutes from the December 3rd, 2024 State Allocation Board meeting are on stamped pages 1 through 24 of today's agenda. I would request the board approve the minutes.
Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, before we take up the motion, are there any other comments from board members regarding the minutes? Seeing none, are there any public comments regarding the minutes? Okay. Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. If we'll go ahead and call roll.
Okay. Assemblymember Marisucci. Aye. Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies. Aye. Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez. Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales.
This is seating, so the Senate to most votes active today.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Lasso, aye. Michelle Perrault.
Aye.
Perrault, aye. And that motion carries.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead now and move on to the executive officer statement. Ms. Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several updates for the board as part of the executive officer statement today. Firstly, as all of you know, wanted to acknowledge the wildfires that have been impacting school districts in Los Angeles County quite significantly in recent weeks. On January 7th, as you know, the governor proclaimed a state of emergency related to the severe windstorm conditions and multiple wildfires in the area. On January 14th, the governor issued Executive Order N-625, one of several executive orders issued in response to the state of emergency. And this executive order in particular includes components aimed at assisting school districts, local educational agencies that have been impacted by these fires. In part, the executive order includes an offer of coordinated support from multiple state agencies who are engaging with the local educational agencies that have had school sites destroyed or significantly damaged by the fires in order to help them develop a plan in the short term to temporarily house displaced students and repair and rebuild the impacted schools as appropriate. The Office of Public School Construction is conducting coordinated outreach with 7 other state agencies as part of this process, and I'm proud to say that we've, at this point, made direct contact with each of the school districts and charter schools that have had facilities significantly damaged or destroyed in these fires. We are, as staff at OPSC, providing information on the board's programs, which may help assist in this disaster, in part options including applying for funding under the Facility Hardship Program, requesting assistance with interim housing or any other assistance under the provisions authorized by Proposition 2, just approved by a majority of voters in November, and also other funding opportunities that may be available under other board programs such as new construction, modernization, and the Charter School Facilities Program. We remain committed to assisting local educational agencies in this difficult time. And another note on that I'd like to share is that although we previously announced we would be opening a filing round for the Charter School Facilities Program on May 4th of this year through August 31st, based on our knowledge that a number of charter schools have been displaced from their facilities due to the impacts of these wildfires, we are currently assessing whether a change in that timeline for the filing period is warranted. We do have existing regulations that authorize me to make changes to deadlines in this type of circumstance when there's a state of emergency in order to ensure continued and equitable access to state allocation board programs by school districts and local educational agencies. So I will report back to the board at the February meeting regarding the timeline on the filing period for the Charter School Facilities Program. Additionally, we do have an existing process whereby school districts that are working with our office on pending applications can request an extension to the normal deadlines when we're requesting follow-up information of them in the event there is a state of emergency that's causing impacts as the current one is. We do have that process again in place and up and running, and in the information items of the agenda beginning next month, you will see an item reflecting any school district that requested an extension based on those provisions. I also wanted to share that the governor's budget proposal released on January 10th includes one proposal of interest to the board, specifically a proposal for the Department of General Services to implement and administer Proposition 2. Specifically, this proposal includes approximately $12.2 million and 14 positions in fiscal year 2025-26 proposed for the Office of Public School Construction as the first annual investment of a total $59.5 million over a 5-year period from the 2024 State School Facilities Fund established by Proposition 2. Additionally, the proposal includes $356,000 from various funds on an ongoing basis and 2 positions for other DGS divisions to support implementation and administration of Proposition 2. This proposal assumes that our application processing rate remains at what it currently and has been in recent years, about $1.5 billion annually. The proposal, of course, is subject to change during the annual budget development process. And I'd note that today's agenda does include an item for the board to consider reserving state agency administrative costs from the bond authority authorized by Proposition 2. We also have a series of stakeholder meetings upcoming. We had an item at the December meeting in which we outlined some of our planned timelines around implementation of Proposition 2. I'm pleased to announce the first 2 stakeholder meetings toward our regulatory development will be held on January 30th and February 13th, 2025. After discussion and input from stakeholders in the stakeholder meeting process, we will bring back proposed regulations for the board's consideration on a flow basis. And as the regulations are approved by the board, we will work with the Office of Administrative Law in order to file them and have them become effective. Finally, as part of today's agenda, we're presenting the annual adjustment to the school facility program grants based on the statewide cost index for Class B construction. I'd note that the recommended adjustment this year is an increase of 0.49%. And our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. Are there some questions or comments? Yes, Assemblymember Davies.
Yes, question on the governor's proposed, the $12.2 million and 14 positions. Are the 14 positions coming out of the $12.2 million, or would that be separate cost?
So the additional cost with the additional positions that are proposed is included as part of the $12.2 million.
Do we know how much that is, or is it possible to find out how much that is?
Yes, there's a budget change proposal for piece of the governor's budget that has a table with that breakout, we can be sure to send that to your staff after today's meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Assemblymember Marsucci.
Thank you. Ms. Kirk, first of all, thank you for engaging immediately following the LA wildfires. I know that there, as you indicated, there have been multiple agencies that are working together to help with the rebuilding effort. Do you have a count in terms of the number of schools that have been completely lost, that have been suffered significant damage?
Our understanding at this time from preliminary information, but at this time our understanding is that there are 5 school facilities within the Pasadena Unified School District that were significantly damaged or destroyed, and 3 school facilities within the Los Angeles Unified School District that were significantly damaged or destroyed. A number of them were occupied by charter schools as well.
And so I know that Proposition 2 has specific provisions related to the Facilities Hardship Program. That means that does that mean that if the districts decide to repair or rebuild the schools, that they would go to the front of the line in terms of eligibility for Proposition 2 funds?
Our existing regulations do provide that applications for facility hardship funding go to the front of the line, and they receive first priority for processing by our staff and then first priority for presentation to the board for funding consideration. That said, in the past with other school districts that have lost facilities due to fire, like Paradise Unified, like the Pioneer Union Elementary School District up in Butte County, we have seen sometimes in the course of working with them at a staff level that other programs perhaps better suit their needs. In that case, oftentimes we've brought forward an appeal on behalf of the school district for the board's consideration, and those are still prioritized above the standard application processing timeframe.
Okay. All right. And I'm also familiar that Proposition 2 has the temporary classroom or interim housing funding. To date, have any of the either Pasadena Unified or LA Unified applied for any interim housing, or is it too soon?
We have not received applications based on those provisions of Proposition 2 yet. We have made the districts aware of the availability of those options. I think we're also very fortunate that the board just last month adopted interim policies for initial implementation of Proposition 2, and among those was sort of an interim process by which the board can consider any such requests that may come in using the existing appeal process. So of course with the election just held in November, the bill's provisions becoming operative in November, fortunately this swift action by the board in December to take that step, I think really facilitates our ability to say there's already an existing process by which districts can request that additional assistance from the board.
Okay, thank you. I know from being from Los Angeles County that not just the communities that have been directly impacted by the fires, but all of Los Angeles is reeling, continues to be reeling from all the traumatic impacts of the wildfires. And so I know that rebuilding the schools or housing the students is a top priority to, for the families to return to normalcy. And so I hope that the Office of Public School Construction can help with that rebuilding and that return to normalcy as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions from the board? Yes, Ms. Lasso.
More of a comment than a question. Ms. Kirk, I just want to say how thankful I am to you and your team for providing all of the extra resources and information to the districts in Southern California that are facing this catastrophe. And I know it's all the other duties as assigned, but I've heard from superintendents and other local education leaders that they really, really appreciate the work that the Office of Public School Construction and the Division of State Architect are doing on their behalf. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any additional?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I may.
yes, Mr. Morales.
I just want to echo Ms. Lasso's comments. Apologize if it's a little noisy. I'm reporting out from the Joint Field Office here in Pasadena. And Ms. Cook and her team have been extremely helpful with the coordinated efforts here with all the other state agencies of helping the schools. They're going through a lot, but it's great to see that there's overwhelming support by all the state agencies. A lot of those efforts are being led by Ms. Kirk, along with our colleagues from the Division of State Architect, and again, several other state agencies. So thank you, Ms. Kirk and her team for all the help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morales. I think it's a little noisy in the background, but I think we got the gist, and appreciate you being down there and working again across, I know, multiple state agencies. I want to echo what we've already heard from some of my fellow board members. Rebecca and her team have been tirelessly working. I have been on multiple calls and multiple outreaches with her, with not just the charters, but with LAUSD and in the other, Pasadena district as well. And I know the team is we're working across agencies to figure out how can we quickly and swiftly provide, whether it's temporary housing or it's making sure those that maybe weren't impacted are cleaned up enough that we can get students back into classrooms, because we know that part of the recovery process is that mental and well-being of our students' health, that they be with their peers and that they can continue some sense of normalcy when everything else, I think, is very chaotic. But your team has been amazing, and you guys have been working tirelessly, so I appreciate that greatly. I'd like to offer up a suggestion and some direction. I did want to note, though, that it looks like we have been joined by Senator Laird remotely, so want to just note that so that folks are aware. That being said, I know this is an information item, and I know your team is going to continue to work on this, but I would like to provide some direction with board's support to the staff to perhaps at our next meeting in February, if we could actually bring forward or ask staff to kind of work on if there are ways that we can be more helpful in this space of recovery, potentially in an action item, depending on what the avenues are. Specifically, I'm also wondering if we can take a look at and have a sense of what might be available currently, or available in the general fund currently for the programs, for our programs here at OPSC specifically, and if there's a way to look at that funding as an opportunity to move funding forward quicker to the impacted districts. So if I could ask the staff maybe to bring us forward something in an action item in next meeting, I'd appreciate it if there's no hesitation from my fellow board members, if that makes sense. Okay, great.
Certainly.
Okay. Any other comments from the board or others? Okay. Are there any public comments? Okay. All right, seeing none, this is not an action item, so we will go ahead and move forward onto our next item of business, which is our consent agenda. So, Ms. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The consent agenda is on stamped pages 27 through 53 of today's agenda. I'd be happy to address any questions, and I request that the board approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from board members? No? Okay. Any comments or none? Okay, it's been moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. If we could please have a roll call, Madam Secretary.
Senator Laird?
Aye.
Laird, aye. Assemblymember Murasucci? Murasucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies? Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez? Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales? Juan Morales?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith?
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso?
Aye.
Lasso, aye. And then Michelle Pearl?
Aye.
Peralt, aye. And that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead now and move on to our financial reports. Oscar?
Thank you. The financial reports are on pages 54 through 93 of today's agenda. I'd be happy to address any questions.
Are there any questions regarding the financial reports? Okay, seeing none. Any public comments? Seeing none. Okay, this is not an action item, so we will go ahead and move forward. I will note our next item was an appeal item, but the appeal item on today's agenda was withdrawn at the request of the Camptonville Union Elementary School District and will be deferred for presentation at a future state allocation board meeting. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and move on to our action items. We have one action item before us. Ms. Kerr?
Thank you. The first action item begins on stamped page 130 of today's agenda. This item presents the annual adjustment to the school facility program per unhoused pupil grant amounts to reflect construction cost changes as shown in the statewide cost index for Class B construction. Since 2015, the board has used the RS Means Construction Cost Index as the index for this annual adjustment. Staff's recommendation is for the board to adopt the annual adjustment for calendar year 2025 to reflect an increase of 0.49% based on the RS Means Construction Cost Index year-over-year change. I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions from the board on this item? Okay. Yes, Assemblymember Suchi.
So I don't want to repeat our discussion from last year, but again, the 0.49 construction cost index, does not appear to reflect the daily realities that we hear from our constituents about inflation, and especially in the construction industry. But I know from the discussion, was it last year or the year before, that there is that I believe a survey of construction costs involving cities across the country. Is that correct?
Sure. So thank you for the question, Assemblymember. Last year, when staff presented the item for the annual adjustment in January 2024, at that time, the RS Means Construction Cost Index was actually reflecting a year-over-year negative adjustment, negative 1.33%, compared to what the grant amounts were in 2023, the preceding year. There were concerns expressed by some stakeholders at the State Allocation Board meeting in January, who basically expressed that they didn't feel that a negative adjustment was reflective of costs that they were seeing in the field. That was also, I'd note, only the second time in the history of the school facility program since 1998 that it happened to be a negative adjustment. As a result, in part, the board requested that staff do a comparison of alternate indices and measures of construction costs that could be used for the board's annual adjustment. We did present that item as an information item in May 2024. I'd like to compliment my staff that worked on that item. They did a really great job doing a deep dive comparison there. We also worked closely with the stakeholders that had raised those concerns for the board's consideration, specifically the Coalition for Adequate School Housing, in trying to identify a pretty broad cast of potential measures of construction costs in California. Ultimately, we'd found that there were 5 that met the statutory criteria of being a Class B construction cost index for the annual adjustment, and we had kind of a table comparison of various features and the methodology of each of those 5. And then we also had taken a look at, had the board used that, any of those alternate measures over the past, well, I don't want to do the math, but since 2015, when the board started using RS Means, what the end result for the grants would have been. And part of what we found was that RS Means, in terms of the amount of the grants, what they would be, it was right in the middle of the 5, the median amount. The other thing that I would note was that the methodology did seem to staff that RS means is still the most reflective of California costs because it's based on exclusively California cities data, whereas we'd found that some of the other indices that were available pulled national data from a smaller subset of cities reflective in California. So for those reasons, staff's recommendation was that it seemed reasonable to continue using the RS means construction cost index for this purpose, and that's the basis of today's adjustment. The one other thing I would note, just for context as well, although there was a negative adjustment last year and the 0.49% increase before you today is relatively small, a relatively small increase. In the years immediately preceding the negative adjustment last year, we did see very significant increases. I'd say in a 2 or 3 year span, over 20%. There was one year that was over 15% year over year. So there's also some fluctuation where the negative last year and the smaller amount in an increase this year could be a little bit of a leveling out after big spikes we saw during COVID times, for instance.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Before we take that up, though, are there any public comments? Okay, seeing none, we do have a motion and a second. So, Secretary, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Senator Laird?
Aye.
Laird, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci?
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies? Aye. Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez? Aye. Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales? Morales, aye. Thank you, Juan. Jeremy Smith?
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso?
Aye.
Lasso, aye. Michelle Peralt?
Aye.
Peralt, aye. And that motion carries.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to our next item, or action item, proposed regulatory amendments for the school facility program. Ms. Cook?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second action item today begins on stamped page 140 of today's agenda. This item presents clarifying amendments to regulations the board approved on an emergency basis in September 2024. The clarifying changes are reflected on stamped page 141 of the agenda. Specifically, they indicate that when the board considers whether to authorize an 18-month time limit on fund release for apportionments pertaining to a school facility on a military installation, the board will consider whether additional time is needed for the district to align with federal timelines associated with its invitation to receive federal funding. I request that the board adopt the clarifying amendments and authorize staff to combine the language in this item with the previously approved emergency regulations to file those regulations with the Office of Administrative Law and make them effective on a permanent basis. I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, are there any public comments? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
A motion.
Okay, I heard a motion by Assemblymember, was it Davies? Yes, and then a second by Ana Lasso. If you please, Secretary, call the roll.
Very well. Senator Laird?
Aye.
Laird, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci?
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies? Aye. Davies, aye. Assemblymember Alvarez? Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales?
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith?
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso?
Aye.
Lasso, aye. Michelle Peralt?
Aye.
Peralt, aye. And that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and now move to our next action item, implementation of Proposition 2, new construction and modernization set-asides and administrative costs for the school facility program. Ms. Kirk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This action item begins on stamped page 149 of today's agenda. There are a number of decision points here in this item today for the board's consideration. So on November 5th, 2024, California voters approved Proposition 2, implementing provisions of Assembly Bill 247. In part, Proposition 2 provides $8.5 billion in bond proceeds for the construction and modernization of transitional kindergarten through grade 12 school facilities in California. Proposition 2 specifies the amounts that are allocated to the school facility program for new construction, modernization, the charter school facility program, and the career technical education facilities program. Proposition 2 also authorizes discretionary set-asides. Specifically, Proposition 2 authorizes the board to designate up to 10% of the funding allocated for both new construction and modernization to be available specifically for small school districts with an enrollment of 2,500 students or fewer. Proposition 2 also allows a discretionary set-aside of up to $115 million, specifically from Modernization Bond Authority, to be available to address the remediation of lead in water at school sites. Finally, Proposition 2 also contains a provision for the board to provide a $5 million grant to the California Department of Education in order to augment CDE's federal Supporting America's School Infrastructure grant and support priority school districts as defined. This grant can be provided at the board's discretion from a combination of new construction and modernization funding. This item before you today, in part, seeks the board's direction on the discretionary set-asides that are authorized in Proposition 2. We're also seeking the board's action on the $5 million grant to the Department of Education from Bond Authority authorized in Proposition 2. There's a second component to this item as well, which pertains to state agency administrative costs to administer the school facility program. I mentioned as part of the executive officer statement that there is a governor's budget proposal related to administrative costs for implementation and administration of the program, and Proposition 2 for the Department of General Services, including the Office of Public School Construction. This item requests in part that the board consider reserving funding bond authority from Proposition 2 for OPSC's anticipated administrative cost needs over a 5-year period. The reason that it's looking at a 5-year period is that based on our current processing rate of about $1.5 billion annually, we anticipate it's going to be roughly 5 years for the $8.5 billion in new authority under Proposition 2 to be processed by our staff and brought before the board for consideration and award to school districts. So this item seeks the board's approval additionally to reserve funds for state agency administrative costs. In addition to the OPSC administrative costs, there are also administrative costs incurred to administer the school facility program by the Department of Education and the State Controller's Office. That's a component of the request in this item as well. I would note there's a fourth state agency that has a role in administering the program. The California School Finance Authority under the Treasurer's Office jointly administers the charter school facilities program in particular with our office. However, they have a different provision in law authorizing their administrative costs, and as a result, they have indicated, and we concurred, they have adequate funds set aside from prior bonds, that they do not see a need at this time to set aside additional administrative funding from Proposition 2 Bond Authority. I'll direct, because there are a lot of moving pieces, admittedly, in this item, I'd like to direct the board's attention to stamped page 156 of today's agenda, which reflects staff's recommendations on this item as a starting point. The recommendations that we've put before the board for consideration, the first recommendation is that the board approve the set-asides authorized for 10% of new construction authority and 10% of modernization authority to be set aside specifically for small school districts. That would be $330 million from new construction bond authority and $400 million from modernization bond authority. The rationale behind that recommendation is that we know many provisions in Proposition 2 from when AB 247 was going through the legislative process, that many provisions were intended to improve equity, and particularly equity and equitable access to the school facility program by small school districts particularly. And therefore, we recommend approval of those set-asides as being consistent with the intent of those provisions. The second staff recommendation on this item is for the board to approve the set-aside of $115 million from Modernization Bond Authority for a new grant program that would address testing and remediation of lead in water at school sites. Our third recommendation is that the board approve the $5 million grant to the Department of Education to augment their existing federal grant and support priority school districts. The board has the discretion to determine how much of that grant is pulled from new construction bond authority and/or modernization bond authority. Our staff recommendation is to take $2.5 million from each source in order to comprise that $5 million grant, with the rationale being that CDE will help assist small school districts with applications both for new construction and modernization. The fourth recommendation in this item is that the board approve the reservation of bond authority in the amount of $80,895,000 for fiscal years 2025-26 through 2029-30 for the estimated administrative costs of the Office of Public School Construction, the California Department of Education, and the State Controller's Office. That amount is reflected earlier in the item, a breakdown by individual agency. It is a 5-year administrative cost amount estimated. The board also has the ability to determine any amount that is reserved for state agency administrative costs, which programs within the bond are assessed those charges for the reservation of administrative costs. Our staff recommendation is that the amount reserved be prorated based on the proportionate amount that each program represents in comparison to the $8.5 billion authorized for the school facility program by Proposition 2. That would be consistent with the board's last action to set aside authority from a bond for administrative costs, which occurred in 2019. So this set of 4 recommendations, for one, I would note that all of those actions are set-asides or reservations of funds. So for the board's awareness, if in the future it becomes needed to re-examine those set-asides or reservations that are decided upon today, the board does have the authority to do that. If we find the demand for any given program, for instance, the lead and water program, since it is newly established, we don't have a great set of data on what the demand would be there. The board could revisit and determine to move that allocation that had been set aside for another purpose in the future if desired. Finally, for reference, I would note the table on the bottom of stamped page 156. As I said, a lot of moving pieces here to this item. This table reflects the amounts that are authorized by Proposition 2. The middle column there shows what's authorized for each purpose. And then the column to the right shows the amounts that would be available if the board adopts all 4 of the staff recommendations as presented on that page. However, unfortunately, I also have to acknowledge that I made an error on the table, which I promise State Allocation Board member Juan Morales was an honest mistake, and I neglected to include the $5 million grant to CDE on this table, even though it is a component of our recommendation. So for that reason, you should have each received an email indicating the updated amounts, which I'll note for the record. There should also be a column in that table indicating the $5 million grant to the California Department of Education authorized by Proposition 2, reflecting that there would be that $5 million grant made if the board adopts all 4 of staff's recommendations, and the updated corrected amounts that would, as a result, be remaining for new construction and modernization projects of any size would be for new construction a total of $2,935,950,950, and for modernization a total of $3,444,479,350. I'm pleased to address any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the detailed report and the walkthrough, as we do have several different components we're looking at. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Yes, someone.
Thank you. Appreciate the report, especially the breakdown on page 156 and the easy to follow table. I guess the first question would be on the small district set aside for both new construction and modernization, given how the prioritization is given by when data submittal, currently, that's the process. Are we going to now pull out small districts as defined by, I'm sure there's a definition of what we're considering as small school districts, and then they get their own prioritization list with following the same first in, first served, basically?
So it's an excellent question. The set aside is authorized by Proposition 2, but it's discretionary for the board. And frankly, some of the details on how the set aside for small school districts would function in implementation still need to be determined as we're undertaking the series of stakeholder meetings to inform regulatory development when we come back. But what I would note is we would have a set aside if approved by the board as an action on this item. We would reserve those funds for small school districts, which in Proposition 2 are defined as districts with an enrollment of fewer than 2,501 pupils. And essentially the prioritization of application processing and then also presenting applications to the board. Currently, facility hardship applications that address imminent health and safety needs take first priority for both processing by our staff and then presentation and funding consideration by the board. That would remain true whether that's an application coming from a small school district or a larger school district. Otherwise, our regulations right now don't speak to a specific priority order outside of date received beyond those facility hardship projects. By extension, if we have a subset for small school district projects, that would presumably be the way that would operate. However, we need to develop regulations as part of the Proposition 2 implementation this year.
Okay. As far as the lead and water remediation, that doesn't have a set aside for small school districts, but I would imagine they have perhaps similar challenges with applying and what it takes to, and I would assume some of those small districts, particularly rural, may face challenges with lead and water. And so is that also going to be further discussed through the stakeholder process for prioritization or how we would handle smaller school districts that may have those needs?
So Proposition 2 does have some specificity around how that program would operate. Specifically, it speaks to it being a filing round based program. So versus, or I guess in contrast to new construction and modernization and facility hardship, where we accept applications on an ongoing basis, we would establish a set period of time during which districts could submit applications for that specific program. Any type of, it would be actually a standalone program as envisioned in the Proposition 2 language too. So there wouldn't be a separate prioritization or one that interacted with our other programs necessarily. It would be more timeline based on the dates that the board decides upon for the filing rounds.
Okay. And then on the question of the administrative costs, is this just a continuation of basically the existing costs to operate the programs that are being funded by the prior bonds, or are we talking about additional staff and resources being assigned to the program?
It's a great question. It's a little bit of both, so I'll explain. For the administrative cost amounts for the Department of Education and the State Controller's Office that are in this item, those are based off of what they historically have received for their administrative costs to help administer the school facility program, and then taken out for a 5-year, essentially multiplied by 5 for that 5-year period. For the Office of Public School Construction's administrative costs, and really I should say DGS, because there's a smaller component that relates to some of the other DGS divisions that would help us to implement and administer Proposition 2. For that component, it is aligned in this item with what's in the governor's budget proposal for DGS implementation and administration of Proposition 2. What I would note there is because it includes for OPSC 14 additional positions, a component of that request is related to adding that additional staff capacity, whereas the remainder of that request is essentially continuing our existing administrative cost need. Because in recent years, we had received general fund proceeds for the program, and the general fund was providing our administrative costs as well. Right now, until this 2025-26 budget is adopted and enacted, there's actually no underlying administrative costs or state operations budget for OPSC for the coming fiscal year until there's a budget action. So we see returning to bond authority as the source there.
So the 100% of the amount that's being presented in the governor's budget for OPSC is for the purposes of individuals who will be managing the bond program, meaning the bond proceeds aren't funding any other non-bond related activities. I think that's a question we could also ask during budget, but I figure I ask now.
Sure, understood. No, so the proceeds, all of the proceeds of Proposition 2 have to be used for the purposes that were approved by the voters, the full $8.5 billion. Therefore, any amount that goes for administrative costs would strictly be to administer the school facility program and those provisions in Proposition 2. And I'll add as well, I know you serve also as the Assembly Budget Committee Chair, Subcommittee Chair for Education. So this process here is a little bit unique compared to many budgets. And I think maybe I should delineate that a little bit here too. Of course, what's in the governor's budget is just a proposal, kind of the opening salvo from the governor on the budget development process over the next 6-month period. Although the amount in this action item for OPSC's administrative cost aligns with that proposal, essentially the way that it works is that the amount that's designated for administrative costs from Proposition 2 has to be determined in the Budget Act. So that will be finalized when we have the enacted budget for 2025-26, and then each year thereafter. That amount will be set in coordination in the normal budget development process with the legislature and the administration. What this item today would do is just reserve bond authority up front in anticipation of those administrative costs, whatever they may be, once the Budget Act is enacted. And of course, if there's a change in the budget development process that results in a change to how much is available, then that's something we could discuss again with the board as needed. This action would just reserve funds. And the reason that we bring the item now, early in the life of Proposition 2 versus waiting until, say, July, when we know what the enacted budget will do for this 1 year at a time, the reason we've recommended the board consider reserving 5 years, or what we're estimating to be our full administrative cost need for the life of Proposition 2, is that it kind of facilitates transparency for all the school districts, local educational agencies, and the field to know up front, here's how much will actually be available for projects, versus having to come back each year when we have a list of projects on our workload and a list of projects that are beyond bond authority, and districts are expected to be funded, and then the board has to take an action to carve out another 12, 15 million for state administrative costs.
Yeah, and thank you. That all makes sense. And essentially, it's the 80.8 or 80.9 almost is sort of a maximum level, and then obviously the budget will determine what it is. I think not for now, but maybe as a follow-up, since there's additional positions, I think the interest from a budgetary standpoint is what kind of increase to the level of service, or what efficiencies, or what exactly how will the program benefit from the additional resources to get applications more quickly? Whatever it is, I think that's important for us to know as we make those budgetary decisions, and we'll save that for that time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? Yes, Assemblymember Marisucci.
Thank you very much. So following on that discussion, Ms. Kirk, is the administrative cost, or as you indicated, is ultimately going to be determined by the Budget Act of 2025 but the figure that we're going to be, or that is proposed to be voted on today, the 80.895 million, that is the administrative cost to administer the 8.5 billion in Proposition 2 funds.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and so I can easily whip out a calendar or a calculator, but do you know what percentage? I know that whenever we talk to our constituents, they always, the promise was that the funds be used on building and rebuilding and fixing schools and not on administrators. But do you know what percentage that represents in terms of the total bond funds?
I do. It's one of my favorite talking points.
Yeah, okay.
Which is, it's just under 1%. So just under 1% of the 8.5 billion in bond authority authorized by Proposition 2 for the school facility program is what we've proposed be reserved in today's item, and what's also reflected in the governor's budget proposal for consideration in the budget process. So I have to say, I like to note that that's relatively lean on administrative costs compared to percentages that you more often see sometimes in the 5 to 10% range.
I think that number would be something that Elon Musk would be proud of. I wanted to also ask, you proposed 14 additional positions?
That's correct.
And I know that part of Proposition 2 provides for technical assistance to the small school districts.
Yes.
Is that related? Are those additional positions related to the technical assistance for the small school districts?
Some of those positions are related to those provisions in Proposition 2. Some are related to the new lead and water program that would be established if the board opts to make a discretionary set aside for that purpose. And some other functions as well. We do have a breakdown position by position that we're happy to share as well. Okay.
And last but not least, I know that when we were drafting and debating AB 247, while the intent was to address the equity concerns with the small school districts, with the set-asides, ultimately, I know as a lead author for AB 247 that we were not able to measure the relative need of small districts relative to, all of the districts throughout the state that are going to be applying for the bond funds. Just to clarify how the funds are going to be administered, am I correct in understanding that the $4 billion, how much are we talking about? The $4 billion for modernization, that those dollars largely are already accounted for in terms of the backlog of modernization applications to date?
So it is a great question. I'd note a couple of things. One is that in the month of October 2024, we received about 6 months worth of applications, both in terms of the count of actual applications submitted and in terms of the dollar amount requested in state assistance from those applications. About 6 months worth of applications came in our door just in October, right before the election, compared to the monthly averages that we had seen since March 2022 and through September 2024. So we did see a very large uptick in application submittals at that point in time, which I think probably in part reflected a certain excitement around Proposition 2 being on the ballot, a record number of local bonds being on the ballot for school districts, and also perhaps some apprehension about changes in Proposition 2 and what that would look like. We do at this point in time have, let me get to the right page in my agenda, I think it's $3.7 billion approximately. Yes, $3.7 billion roughly in requests for modernization funding specifically as of December 31st, 2024. So that's what we have currently for modernization, excuse me. approximately $1.8 billion in requests for new construction as of that same point in time. I would note that about $205.7 million within that is requesting facility hardship assistance or facility hardship seismic mitigation assistance. And then we do also have the amounts for small school districts as kind of a subset. So those amounts that I'm citing now are all on stamped page 151 of your agenda. Right under the table, there's a paragraph that sort of summarizes where we are with our applications in-house as of the end of December. For the small school districts, right now, those requests are contained within the larger numbers I just mentioned, the $1.8 billion for new construction, $3.7 billion for modernization. For small school districts specifically, if we isolate that from the list, it's about $158.7 million in new construction requests and $210.1 million in modernization funding requests. So what that means, sort of top line, is if the board opts today to set aside the maximum authorized for small school districts, if the small school districts that already have applications in-house ended up perhaps, let's say, opting to withdraw their application from our existing applications received beyond bond authority list, resubmit with that new date for that small school district set aside, then we'd have roughly half of the set aside amounts remaining for small school districts for both new construction and modernization. However, if the board adopts all of the staff recommendations with the discretionary set asides, the grant to the Department of Education and the state agency administrative cost reservation of funds, unfortunately, that does mean that we already have more in requests for modernization than there is funding available. So that means either way, based on the board action on this item, for our February meeting, we will bring back as part of that agenda updates to our workload list, which is what we anticipate will process within available funding, and updates to the applications received beyond bond authority list for any applications that we anticipate not having adequate funding authority for. If the board, as an example, adopts all of the recommendations in this item, what we would see next month is there would be no applications received beyond bond authority list for new construction. Everything would move up to the workload list because there is some availability there in new bond authority. On the modernization side, it's a little bit of a tougher choice, potentially, based on the demand that we've seen for the program, but potentially we could end up with much smaller applications received beyond bond authority list for modernization persisting.
Okay. And last, for myself, the $3.7 billion in modernization funds that have already been applied for, if there were the facility hardship applications that may or may not come from the LA wildfires, they would jump to the top of the line of that funding.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions from the board? Seeing none here, seeing none online. Do we have any public comments on this item? Okay, no public comments. So we're looking for a motion to approve either the recommendations or anything.
I make a motion to approve the recommendations from OPSE.
Okay, we have a first, and I hear a second? Yes, okay, excellent, thank you. Secretary, if you'll please call the roll.
Certainly. Senator Laird?
Aye.
Laird, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci?
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies? Davies, aye, excuse me. Assemblymember Alvarez?
Aye.
Alvarez, aye. Juan Morales?
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith?
Aye.
Smith, aye. Ana Lasso?
Aye.
Lasso, aye. Michelle Peralt?
Aye.
Peralt, aye, and that motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the discussion. We're going to go ahead now and move on to our reports, discussion, and information item. Ms. Kirk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reports, discussion, and information items are on stamped pages 164 through 208 of today's agenda. I'd be happy to address any questions.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, are there any comments or questions from the public? No? Okay. This is not an action item, so we are going to go ahead and move into closed session. However, prior to doing that, we do need to go back to the minutes and open that back up for roll as Senator Laird has joined us.
Senator Laird, how do you vote on the minutes?
Aye.
Laird, aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will now meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E1. All board members, if you'll please follow Ms. Jones to the adjoining conference room. And do we know, we have it set up for remote for them?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
The 2 members that have joined remotely, there should be a different link for you for closed session participation. Do you both have a separate link, Senator Laird and Juan Morales?
I do, but I'm going to have to run out. I'm going to miss the closed session. I apologize.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us.
Bye, Senator.
Bye,
Thank you,
Senator.
Senator.
Yes, can you please resend me the second link, please?
Yep, I got 2 thumbs up. It's on its way.
Okay. All right, the board will reconvene after closed session. Thank you.
Thank you.
13, okay. We're good? Okay. Okay, thank you. We are going to reconvene into open session and pursuant to Government Code Sections 11126E1, E2A, and E2B I, the State Allocation Board met in closed session to confer with and receive advice from legal counsel. The closed session has concluded, and the board provided direction to the executive officer regarding all pending litigation and potential litigation. Is that all I need? Okay. Okay. And then with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 6:25.